The city slept under a blanket of silence, broken only by the faint hum of cars in the distance and the occasional bark of a stray dog. The moonlight fell gently over the empty playground, casting shadows across the swings and the rusty slide. It was the kind of place where children once laughed freely, but at night, it became something else, a quiet shelter, a hiding place. And that was where she was. A small girl, no older than 12, curled up on a cold metal bench. Her knees were pulled tightly against her chest, and a worn-out sweater that looked 3 sizes too big clung to her thin frame. Her hair was tangled, her shoes mismatched, and in her hands, she clutched a tiny stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. She pressed it against her cheek, whispering words only she could hear. Her name was Leela. Every night, she returned to this playground because it was safer than the alleys and warmer than the bus station. She had learned how to hide when the police made their rounds, and how to keep quiet when drunk strangers stumbled nearby. This had been her home for months now. A playground meant for joy had become her last fragile refuge. But Leela never cried in public. She had promised herself she would never give the world that satisfaction. Instead, she dreamed of classrooms she no longer attended, of her mother's lullabies she barely remembered, of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Across the street, behind tall iron gates and walls draped in ivy, stood a mansion. Inside, a man lived who thought he had everything. His name was Edward Hale, a millionaire whose fortune came from building luxury hotels around the world. He was a man of strict schedules, polished suits, and a heart he believed was carved from stone. People called him cold, detached, untouchable. And Edward preferred it that way. Money was his shield, power his companion. To him, emotions were weaknesses, distractions in a world where only numbers truly mattered. He had lived alone in his mansion for years, his life filled with endless meetings, business deals, and silence. But fate has strange ways of weaving lives together. One night, as Edward returned home late from a business dinner, he noticed something unusual. His sleek black car slowed as it passed the playground. In the dim light, he caught a glimpse of movement, a small figure huddled on the bench. At first, he dismissed it. Probably just a runaway teenager, he thought. Not his concern. He told himself the world was full of sad stories, and he wasn't responsible for fixing them. Yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, the image stayed in his mind. That small, fragile shape against the vast emptiness of the night haunted him. The next night, he saw her again. This time, curiosity gnawed at him. Who was she? Why was she there every night? And why did the sight of her, so small and defenseless, make something inside him stir, something he thought he had buried long ago? He began watching from his window, the playground visible from the second floor of his mansion. Each night, at nearly the same hour, she would slip into the playground, settle on the bench, and fall asleep. Sometimes she hugged that worn-out rabbit. Sometimes she looked up at the stars, her lips moving silently as if praying or speaking to someone unseen. Edward tried to ignore it. He drowned himself in work, in television, in expensive wine. But the more he tried, the stronger the image became. That little girl sleeping in the cold, while he slept in silk sheets just across the street, it unsettled him in ways he couldn't understand. Finally, one night, unable to resist, he crossed the street. He walked slowly, almost nervously, toward the playground. The sound of his expensive leather shoes crunching against the gravel felt too loud. As he approached, he saw her, Leela, curled up as always, her tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Edward hesitated. What was he doing? He was a millionaire, a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals, yet here he was, standing awkwardly in a deserted playground, staring at a homeless child. He cleared his throat softly. Leela stirred, her eyes snapping open in alarm. She sat up, clutching her rabbit tightly, ready to run. "It's okay," Edward said quickly, raising his hands as though surrendering. His voice, usually sharp and commanding in boardrooms, sounded strangely gentle. I'm not going to hurt you. She didn't reply. Her eyes, wide, cautious, and far too old for her age, studied him carefully. What's your name? He asked. Silence. I've seen you here. Every night. His words stumbled out awkwardly. Why are you here? Don't you have a home? The question hung heavy in the air. For a moment, Edward thought she wouldn't answer. But then, in a voice so soft he almost missed it, she whispered, no. That single word pierced him. Edward, who thought he had no room left in his heart for emotions, felt something crack inside. Where are your parents? He asked gently. Leela looked down, her fingers tightening around her rabbit. My mom, she got sick. She couldn't work anymore. We lost our apartment. Then, she was gone. Her voice broke. Now it's just me. Edward froze. He didn't know what to say. He had spent his entire life believing money could solve everything. But here, in front of him, was proof of how fragile life really was. For the first time in years, Edward felt tears sting his eyes. He turned away quickly, ashamed of his own weakness. That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his mansion, haunted by the image of the girl outside. He thought of his own past, memories he had long buried. He remembered being a boy, poor and scared, after his father abandoned him and his mother worked herself to death trying to provide. He had promised himself then that he would never be vulnerable again, never be powerless. Money had become his escape. But money had also turned him cold. And now, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, Edward realized something painful. He had become the very man he once despised. The next morning, Edward made a decision. When night fell again, he returned to the playground. This time, he carried a blanket and a bag of food. Leela eyed him suspiciously but didn't run. He handed her the blanket. It's cold, he said simply. She hesitated, then took it. For the first time, he saw a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. Over the next few nights, Edward came back again and again. Sometimes with food, sometimes with books, sometimes just to talk. Slowly, the walls around Leela began to crack. She told him about her mother, about the nights she went hungry, about how she missed school and friends. And Edward listened, really listened. For once, it wasn't about business, money, or power. It was about a little girl who had nothing, and a man who realized he had everything yet felt empty inside. One night, as Edward listened to her whisper about her dreams, how she wanted to be a teacher someday, something inside him broke completely. Tears rolled down his face, unbidden, unstoppable. Leela looked at him, startled. She had never seen a grown man cry before. Why are you crying? She asked softly. Edward choked on his words. Because, I should have seen you sooner. Because you shouldn't be here. Because the world failed you, and so did I. It was the first time Edward Hale admitted weakness, the first time he allowed himself to be human again. That night, he made another decision, one that would change both their lives forever. The following morning, Edward called his lawyers, his assistants, his people. He arranged for guardianship, for school enrollment, for everything. Within days, Leela moved out of the playground and into a warm, safe home, his home. At first, she was shy, overwhelmed by the sudden change. But Edward was patient. He gave her space, gave her comfort, and most importantly, gave her the one thing she had lost, family. For Edward, the transformation was just as profound. The cold millionaire who once believed money was everything discovered something far greater: love, kindness, and the power of giving. Leela reminded him of the boy he once was, and in saving her, he also saved himself. Months passed. Leela flourished in school, her laughter filling the mansion that had once been silent. The playground, once her shelter, became just a memory, a reminder of how far she had come. And Edward, he was no longer the man people called cold. He was something else now, something warmer, something human. In the end, it wasn't money that gave him meaning. It was a small girl, sleeping on a playground bench, who taught him what it truly meant to live. Because sometimes, the greatest wealth is not measured in dollars, but in hearts healed, lives touched, and love rediscovered.